I once believed my life was a flawless portrait of trust and shared dreams. My name is Callan, and for nearly a decade, I thought I had found my perfect partner in Elora. We lived together in a bright loft on the edge of a bustling city, a home that resonated with laughter, soft music drifting through open windows, and long, intimate conversations in the quiet of the night. Elora possessed a captivating elegance. Her smile could light up a room, and her gentle touch made every day feel like a promise kept. Every morning, I awoke to the aroma of her freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft notes of an indie ballad that played in the background. Weekends were devoted to spontaneous adventures, meandering through hidden art galleries, sampling new dishes at quirky bistros, or simply lying side by side as the city's heartbeat pulsed beneath our window. I reveled in every shared moment, completely convinced that we were bound by a love that could weather any storm. Yet, as time passed, I began to notice subtle imperfections along the edges of our well-crafted life. At first, these were little things: a delayed reply to a text, a fleeting hesitation before answering her phone, the way her laughter sometimes seemed a shade too forced. I dismissed these anomalies as the natural rhythms of busy lives, insisting to myself that her girls' night out or her evenings with friends were harmless escapes from routine. After all, Elora was fiercely independent, with a social world of her own. I clung to the image of our flawless union, unwilling to see cracks in the facade I had built so carefully around us. I started to document these small deviations in a worn leather journal, an old habit from my early days as an aspiring writer. Each entry, filled with observations of a missed glance or a seemingly casual phone call, was my silent attempt to capture the slowly eroding trust one felt growing inside me. Deep down, however, I reassured myself that these were mere quirks, not harbingers of betrayal. I believed that love, even when tested by time, would always find a way to remain unblemished. Our home, once a sanctuary of shared secrets and whispered promises, began to feel strangely hollow. I noticed the way Elora's eyes sometimes wandered toward her phone with a mix of anticipation and guardedness, a look I had never seen before. Yet every time I tried to dismiss it, I reminded myself of the many evenings when she returned home smiling, her presence warm and familiar. The comforting rituals of our life, our nightly dinners, our lazy Sunday mornings, continued as if nothing were amiss. One particular Friday, as the week's fatigue hung in the air, Elora cheerfully announced that she'd be heading out with her closest friends for a girls' night out. Her tone was light, even carefree, and I managed a smile as I watched her slip into her favorite coat. I wished her a pleasant evening, masking the faint stirrings of unease that I couldn't quite articulate. As she left, her laughter trailed behind her like a silken promise, and I clung to the belief that nothing could ever tarnish the perfection of our shared life. That night, as I sat alone in our softly lit living room, the gentle hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the quiet that had settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that behind the veil of her nightly adventures, secrets were being kept. Yet, in the safety of our memories, I chose to believe in the strength of our love. Little did I know that this very night would mark the beginning of my journey into a labyrinth of betrayal. As I closed my journal before bed, I promised myself that I would hold onto our memories and the trust we'd built. I believed that even if shadows began to creep into the brightest corners of our life, the light of our love would ultimately prevail. I drifted off to sleep, unaware that the perfect facade I had once cherished was about to crack open, revealing a darkness I had never anticipated. The days following that Friday took on a curious quality, each one tinged with a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty. Elora's stories of her nights out began to shift imperceptibly. Where once she had recounted evenings filled with carefree laughter and camaraderie, her tales now bore a vague quality, half-remembered details, evasive pauses, and a reluctance to divulge the minutiae of her time away from home. I started to notice that when she spoke of these nights, her eyes would occasionally flit away as if guarding a secret. I tried to dismiss these growing misgivings as nothing more than my own overactive imagination, a consequence of the occasional loneliness that crept in when she was away. But every time I caught a glimpse of something amiss, a text message from an unfamiliar number, or a momentary glance at her phone that ended too quickly, I felt the stirring of an uncomfortable truth. In my journal, I began to note every minor detail: the extra time she spent getting ready, the way her tone would change when asked about her plans, the furtive looks that betrayed more than simple friendship. One evening, as twilight melted into night and I sat by the window watching the city's neon glow, a chill ran down my spine. I recalled a particular moment earlier in the week, a brief flash of a name on her phone that I didn't recognize, the soft vibration of an incoming message that she hastily silenced. I tried to rationalize it away. Perhaps it was just a work-related call or a friend checking in. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would not be easily dislodged. Determined to preserve the sanctity of what I believed was our unbreakable bond, I resolved to trust her, if only for a little longer. I told myself that every relationship has its ebbs and flows, and that the small fissures I noticed were not worth the destruction of all we had built. Yet as each day passed, the whisper of suspicion grew louder. I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, every subtle gesture, hoping to catch a clue that might explain the lingering doubts. Late at night, when the world outside was silent and my thoughts roamed free, I began to question the reality of our perfect life. I imagined scenarios where the laughter I had once taken for granted was shared with someone else, where the tender intimacy we cherished was diluted by secrets and half-truths. The very idea of betrayal felt unbearable, yet the evidence of my intuition was mounting, an accumulation of tiny signs that, collectively, suggested that something was very wrong. In a moment of quiet resolve, I decided I could no longer rely solely on my intuition. I would begin to gather evidence, not out of distrust alone but to preserve the truth of our shared history. I started by paying closer attention to the times when Elora was absent, noting the details of her departures and returns. I watched the way she interacted with her phone, the slight hesitation in her smile when she mentioned plans with her friends. Every observation, every flicker of uncertainty was carefully recorded in my journal, a silent testament to the slow disintegration of the trust one had once held dear. Despite my inner turmoil, I maintained the appearance of a loving husband. I offered gentle smiles and words of encouragement, even as my heart ached with each passing moment of uncertainty. I reminded myself that every relationship faced challenges and that perhaps, with time, everything would return to the way it once was. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew that I was teetering on the brink of a revelation that could shatter everything. As the week wore on, I began to notice a recurring pattern, a name that surfaced more often than I cared to admit. Every time Elora mentioned an outing, I caught a hint of that name in the background of her conversations, a name that seemed to carry an undercurrent of intimacy I had never before encountered. It was as if each casual remark was a breadcrumb leading me closer to a truth I had long feared. That night, as rain pattered softly against our window, I sat alone with my thoughts and the glow of the city outside. The journal lay open before me, filled with the fragmented notes of my growing suspicion. I knew that if I did not uncover the truth soon, the delicate balance of our shared life would be irrevocably disturbed. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, I resolved that I would do whatever it took to reveal the secret that lay hidden behind the facade of our perfect existence, even if that truth was one too painful to bear. When Elora announced that she was going out again, this time with a group of friends for what she called another girls' night out, I decided I could no longer remain a passive observer. My heart pounded with a mix of trepidation and grim determination as I followed her discreetly through the labyrinthine streets of our city. Under the veil of night, I trailed her from a respectful distance, determined to catch a glimpse of what lay beneath the surface of her evening plans. At first, she navigated the busy avenues with the ease of someone comfortable in a crowd. I watched as she laughed with a group of acquaintances outside a lively bar, her eyes sparkling with a light that had once filled our shared moments. Yet, as the night deepened, I noticed that her route began to stray from the familiar, a detour into a quieter part of town where the neon signs flickered over narrow streets and shadowed alleys. My pulse quickened with every step she took further from the life I knew. I followed her through winding lanes until she reached a modest restaurant tucked away in a dimly lit side street. Peering through the large front window, I watched with growing dread as she entered, not accompanied by a group of friends, but with a man whose presence seemed both familiar and incongruous in that setting. His features were striking, a confident air, an easy smile that belied the gravity of what was unfolding. In that charged moment, the truth crystallized before my eyes. Elora was not simply out for a carefree night with her friends. She was on a date, and that man was none other than Draven, her ex. The shock of the revelation struck me like a physical blow. I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted, and the city's lights blurred into a haze of betrayal. Through the window, I watched as Elora and Draven took a secluded table in a quiet corner of the restaurant. Their conversation was intimate, punctuated by soft laughter and lingering touches that spoke of familiarity and rekindled passion. I saw Elora's hand gently brush against Draven's, and the way her eyes lit up with an emotion that I had never before seen, a mixture of longing, comfort, and something that could only be described as love. Every detail was seared into my memory. I witnessed them sharing a dessert, their fingers intertwining as they exchanged secretive smiles. At one point, Draven reached across the table to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Elora's ear, a gesture so tender and intimate that it left no doubt in my mind about the depth of their connection. The sight was both erotic and excruciatingly painful, a betrayal so raw that it shattered the carefully constructed illusions of our life together. Hidden in the shadows outside, I struggled to maintain control of my racing emotions. I fumbled for my phone, hesitating only briefly before I began to record snippets of the scene, a digital archive of the proof I so desperately needed. Every whispered word, every stolen glance, was documented with a precision that belied the storm of emotions raging inside me. I knew that what I was witnessing was not just a momentary lapse or an innocent reunion. It was a deliberate act of intimacy that repudiated the vows we had once shared. In the oppressive silence of that moment, as I watched the intimacy unfold, I felt my heart shatter piece by piece. The realization that Elora had chosen to resurrect a past love, the man I had never truly known but who now commanded her affection, was a betrayal of an unimaginable magnitude. The images of their tender exchanges played over and over in my mind, each replay intensifying the sting of the deception. I lingered outside the restaurant for what felt like an eternity, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene that confirmed my worst fears. Every soft laugh and every delicate caress was a dagger to my heart. The darkness around me seemed to close in, and I felt utterly isolated, even as the world continued on obliviously. In that moment, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The perfect facade of our shared past was crumbling, and the raw truth of her betrayal was laid bare for all to see. With trembling hands and a mind reeling from the shock, I returned home that night. My journal was filled with frantic notes and desperate sketches of the scene, each word a testament to the unvarnished reality that I had witnessed. I knew I had to confront this betrayal, not only to reclaim my dignity but also to confront the dark, unfamiliar emotions that now consumed me. The intimacy I had seen was no fleeting dalliance. It was a rekindling of a past love that now threatened to uproot everything I had believed in. In the days following that fateful night, I was tormented by the images I had witnessed. The digital recordings, the photos I'd managed to capture through the restaurant's window, and every whispered exchange between Elora and Draven became the grim evidence that I could no longer ignore. I spent countless hours reviewing the files on my computer, each playback a brutal reminder of the betrayal that now defined my world. My journal overflowed with entries detailing every minute observation, the way Elora's eyes softened when Draven spoke, the gentle caress of their hands, the intimate smile that they shared as if no one else existed. I revisited these memories with a mix of horror and a growing resolve. Each detail confirmed that what I had seen was not a mere moment of nostalgia or a friendly reunion, but a deliberate, physical and emotional reconnection that undermined the very foundation of our marriage. Yet with the evidence in hand came a torrent of internal conflict. I found myself wrestling with a myriad of emotions, crushing sorrow, seething anger, and an almost unbearable sense of humiliation. I had always believed that love could overcome obstacles, that trust was the cornerstone of any meaningful relationship. But now that trust lay shattered at my feet, replaced by a raw and unfiltered reality that I could neither deny nor escape. Late into the night, as rain drummed against the window pane, I pored over the recorded footage in a darkened room, the only light coming from the screen that illuminated my tear-streaked face. I recalled the warmth of Elora's embrace in days gone by, and I contrasted it with the cold, deliberate intimacy I had witnessed that night. I felt as if my very identity was being dismantled, each piece of evidence a shard of the trust that had once defined me. In the quiet moments between agonizing reflections, I began to compile a detailed dossier, a digital archive that included screenshots, audio snippets, and carefully transcribed text messages. Each entry was methodically dated and annotated, forming a timeline that left no doubt about the nature of her betrayal. I knew that I would need this dossier when the time came to confront her, for I wanted the full, unvarnished truth laid bare, a truth that could no longer be hidden behind vague explanations or empty reassurances. But even as I gathered the physical evidence, I found myself questioning the person I was becoming. In the midst of my inner turmoil, a dark resolve was forming, a desire not merely to confront Elora with the evidence but to exact a retribution that would leave an indelible mark on both her and Draven. I realized that my pain had transformed me, hardening my emotions until forgiveness became an impossible luxury. The intimacy I had once cherished was now twisted into a weapon of betrayal, and I vowed that I would not allow her actions to go unpunished. I began to rehearse conversations in my mind, imagining the moment when I would lay the evidence before her and demand answers. I pictured her shock, the flush of guilt in her eyes, and the futile attempts to justify what she had done. With every imagined confrontation, my resolve strengthened. I was no longer the man who could simply brush aside small doubts and hold onto the hope of reconciliation. I was a man transformed by betrayal, prepared to confront the painful truth with a determination that bordered on ruthless. At the same time, the physical evidence ignited memories of a time when our intimacy had been a sacred bond, a space of vulnerability and trust shared only between us. The contrast between that cherished past and the brutal present tore at my soul, intensifying my internal conflict. I felt both the ache of lost love and the bitter sting of betrayal, a dichotomy that would shape every decision I made in the days to come. As I closed my journal on another sleepless night, I made a fateful decision. I would no longer be a passive sufferer of this deception. The evidence was overwhelming, and it demanded an answer, not just in words, but in actions. I resolved that I would confront Elora and Draven, and that the retribution I sought would be as physical as it was emotional, a reckoning that would force them both to face the consequences of their actions. With that grim determination, I prepared myself for the next chapter, a confrontation that would change the course of my life forever. The day of reckoning arrived under a leaden sky that mirrored the weight of the truth I now carried. I invited Elora to our loft under the guise of an important conversation about our future, a ruse designed to corner her in the familiar confines of our home where the full extent of her betrayal could be laid bare. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged the evidence on our coffee table, printed screenshots, audio clips, and pages of meticulous journal entries that documented every detail of her secret meetings with Draven. When Elora arrived that afternoon, I greeted her with a calm veneer that belied the storm raging within me. Her eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of anxiety, a hesitation that I had hoped to uncover. As we settled into the living room, the atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken tension. I dared not waste another moment of silence. With a voice that trembled between hurt and steely resolve, I began to speak. "Elora," I said, "we've built a life together on trust and shared dreams. But somewhere along the way, that trust was broken." I motioned toward the spread of evidence before us. Her eyes widened as she took in the undeniable proof, the photos of her tender moments with Draven, the messages that spoke of intimacy and longing, the timeline that left no room for denial. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but silence. The air between us was thick with the weight of betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to explain away the evidence. Her voice was soft, tentative, a fragile attempt to justify what could no longer be hidden. She mumbled that it was just a moment of weakness, that Hurt Girl's night outs had taken an unexpected turn. But I could see the hollowness behind her words, the guilt that shimmered in her gaze as if each syllable were a confession of the intimacy she had sought elsewhere. As the confrontation escalated, my emotions surged forth. I recounted every moment I had observed, every detail I had meticulously recorded. My voice, once gentle and filled with memories of love, now rang with the bitter truth of shattered promises. "You told me it was just a girl's night out," I said, "but you chose to revive a past that was never truly behind you. You chose to share your heart with him, a man I never even knew existed in our shared life." Each word was a dagger, striking at the foundation of the home we had built together. In that charged moment, I could see the transformation in her, a dawning realization of the irreversible consequences of her actions. Her eyes flickered with remorse, but also with an unspoken plea for forgiveness that I could no longer offer. I warned her that the truth was out, that our lives would never return to what they once were. The intimacy we had once cherished was now a scar, a mark of betrayal that would not easily fade. Unable to contain the torrent of emotions any longer, I left her alone in our apartment. The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled with the echoes of our shattered dreams. As I stepped out into the overcast afternoon, I felt the first stirrings of a dark resolve, a determination that the price of betrayal would be paid in full. I vowed that I would not allow this deception to go unanswered, that both Elora and Draven would face a reckoning that was as physical as it was emotional. In the days that followed our painful confrontation, the raw wound of betrayal festered within me, transforming into a seething need for retribution. I immersed myself in a relentless pursuit of justice, one that would force both Elora and Draven to confront the gravity of their actions. Every waking moment became a study in planning, as I began to map out the vulnerabilities in the lives of the two who had so callously betrayed my trust. I started by delving deeper into Draven's life. Through careful research, I discovered that behind his confident exterior lay a man with flaws, moments of recklessness, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I scoured his social media, spoke discreetly with mutual acquaintances at the gym, and slowly pieced together a profile that revealed the cracks in his polished facade. Every detail I uncovered became ammunition in my growing arsenal of retribution. At the same time, I embarked on a personal transformation of my own. I enrolled in self-defense classes and dedicated countless hours at the gym, sculpting my body into a vessel of controlled strength and resolve. Each training session was not merely an exercise in physical fitness. It was a ritualistic preparation for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. I learned to channel my grief and anger into precise, deliberate movements, a dance of retribution that would leave no doubt about the cost of betrayal. Late into the night, in the solitude of our now empty apartment, I meticulously organized the dossier I had built over the past weeks. Every screenshot, every audio clip, every journal entry was compiled into a comprehensive record, a silent testimony to the decay of the trust we once shared. I mapped out the timeline of Elora's secret meetings, marking the exact locations and times where the intimacy with Draven had flourished. Each detail reinforced the inescapable truth that the betrayal was not an isolated incident, but a systematic dismantling of the life we had built. As I reviewed my plans, a dark resolve took root within me. I imagined the moment when I would intercept them, a confrontation staged not merely to reveal the truth, but to inflict a punishment that was as physical as it was irreversible. I envisioned a scenario where I would catch them in the midst of their clandestine intimacy, where every stolen kiss and whispered secret would be repaid with the harsh sting of my retribution. The thought both horrified and exhilarated me, fueling the transformation that was steadily consuming my heart. Even as I wrestled with the internal conflict of losing the man I once was, a man capable of forgiveness, I found that the growing need for vengeance drowned out any remnants of compassion. The images of Elora and Draven together haunted my every thought, a relentless reminder of the betrayal that had shattered my world. In my journal, I recorded every surge of anger, every pang of regret, until my words became a manifesto of retribution, a promise that the price of betrayal would be exacted in full. I decided that the next time Elora ventured out, under the pretense of another girl's night, I would follow her to the very place where I had first witnessed the intimacy with Draven. In that familiar, dimly lit restaurant, I would confront them both, ensuring that the repercussions of their actions would be as physical as they were emotional. The seeds of vengeance had been sown, and now I was ready to nurture them into an act of irreversible justice. The night I had been preparing for arrived with a foreboding chill. Under a shroud of dense fog and rain, the city's neon lights blurred into a surreal canvas of reflections. I drove through slick, empty streets with an intensity that matched the storm raging within me. Tonight, Elora was expected to go out once again. This time, I knew, under the guise of another carefree evening. But I was no longer content to let the night pass in silent agony. I parked a discreet distance from the restaurant where I had first seen her with Draven. From the darkness of my car's tinted windows, I watched as Elora emerged into the night, her figure illuminated by the flickering glow of street lamps. Beside her, unmistakably, walked Draven. Every step they took together was a testament to the intimacy that I had come to know all too well, a betrayal that demanded a reckoning. Heart pounding and resolve steeled by weeks of planning, I left my car and moved silently toward the entrance. Inside, the restaurant was awash in soft, ambient light and the murmur of quiet conversations, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions within me. I navigated through the crowd until I reached a secluded table in a dim corner, where I knew Elora and Draven were seated. As I approached, the conversation between them faltered, and a tense silence fell over the space. Without hesitation, I stepped into the light. The shock on Elora's face was instantaneous, an expression that mixed disbelief with dawning horror. Draven, startled and unprepared, barely had time to register my presence before the fury in my eyes took over. In that charged moment, words became secondary to the overwhelming need for retribution. I launched myself at Draven first, a swift, calculated burst of violence that caught him off guard. Every blow was measured, fueled by months of pent-up anger and betrayal. The impact of my strikes echoed through the restaurant as onlookers gasped and murmured in alarm. Draven staggered backward, his confident facade crumbling under the force of my assault. Then I turned my attention to Elora. The intimacy that had once been the foundation of our life was now a weapon against me, a constant reminder of the trust she had so carelessly shattered. I advanced, my movements precise and unyielding. With each calculated strike, I unleashed the anguish and fury that had built up inside me, forcing her to confront the reality of her actions in the most physical, uncompromising way possible. Amid the chaos, I shouted declarations of betrayal and retribution, words that pierced the still air of the restaurant like daggers. I made sure that both Elora and Draven understood that this was not a moment of impulsive anger, but a long-anticipated reckoning. The restaurant, once a haven of casual conversation and quiet dinners, transformed into a stage for my raw, unfiltered vengeance. The intensity of the violence was overwhelming, an eruption of emotions and physical force that left no doubt about the irreversible consequences of their betrayal. As the assault subsided, I paused amid the stunned silence of the onlookers and the broken forms of Elora and Draven. My chest heaved with exhaustion, and I could barely register the mixture of relief and sorrow that coursed through me. I knew that nothing could ever restore what had been lost, but in that moment, I had reclaimed a piece of the honor that had been so brutally violated. I left the restaurant under the cloak of night, the rain washing away the remnants of that violent encounter, and stepped into a future forever altered by the echoes of that fateful confrontation. In the days that followed that night of reckoning, the world seemed to slow into a somber cadence. I returned to our once shared loft, a space now haunted by the ghosts of shattered intimacy and irreversible choices. The physical wounds, both mine and those of Elora and Draven, would fade with time, but the emotional scars were etched indelibly into my soul. News of the violent confrontation spread quickly through our community, carried on hushed whispers and furtive glances. I became a figure shrouded in both sympathy and fear, a man whose quest for retribution had ignited a controversy that challenged the boundaries of love and betrayal. The police inquiries were clinical, their questions echoing in a haze of bureaucratic detachment, while the public's judgment fell like a weight upon my shoulders. Yet, amid the fallout, I found a grim solace in the certainty that the price of betrayal had been exacted. Elora disappeared soon after that night, her whereabouts unknown, leaving behind a void filled with unanswered questions and regrets. Draven, too, faded into obscurity, a shadow of the man he once claimed to be. I was left alone with the remnants of my actions, a man transformed by the relentless pursuit of vengeance, now forced to live with the haunting memories of every blow delivered and every word of retribution shouted in the heat of that moment. Late at night, in the solitary quiet of our apartment, I poured my reflections into a new journal, a raw, unfiltered account of my descent from a man of love into one defined by loss and retribution. I wrestled with the duality of my existence, the memory of a time when trust had been our guiding light versus the bitter reality of a betrayal that had demanded a price beyond measure. Every bruise on my skin, every echo of that violent night, was a testament to the irreversible transformation that had taken hold of me. I began to question the nature of justice itself, whether the physical violence that had momentarily filled the void of my shattered heart could ever bring true closure. The satisfaction of retribution was fleeting, replaced by an aching loneliness that no amount of vengeance could assuage. I realized that in seeking to punish those who had wronged me, I had also condemned a part of myself, transforming the tender man I once was into someone unrecognizable, forever haunted by the ghosts of betrayal. And yet, amid the despair, a small ember of resolve remained. I vowed that my story, raw, painful, and unfiltered, would serve as a cautionary chronicle for anyone who dared to break the sacred bonds of trust. The intimate moments that had once defined our love, now twisted into symbols of betrayal, would forever remind me of the steep cost of deception. In sharing my journey, I hoped to forge a path toward understanding, a way to transform the bitter aftertaste of vengeance into a lesson on the fragility of human relationships. As I stand at the crossroads of an uncertain future, I carry with me the knowledge that redemption is a slow, arduous journey. The scars of that night will never fully fade, but perhaps, in time, they will guide me toward a semblance of peace. I have become both the avenger and the wounded, a man irrevocably altered by the ghosts of betrayal and the unyielding price of revenge. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world is still and the echoes of the past seem to whisper on the wind, I allow myself to wonder if the cycle of love and betrayal will ever find its end. I have learned that while retribution may offer a fleeting moment of catharsis, it is a road paved with irreversible choices and lasting regret. And so, as I close this final chapter of my turbulent saga, I accept that the journey toward forgiveness, of others and, ultimately, of oneself, is long and uncertain. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.